Hello, stand-uppers, stand-uppists, SUPD-shees. Wait, what? My guests today are writer, author, and podcaster Derek Thompson and civil rights activist and SiriusXM host Michelangelo Signorile. This is Stand Up Daily. My name is Pete Dominic. Let's do it! Stand up. Hello, folks. I'm taping today's show, like most days, from my solar-powered shed in the backyard of where I live with my wife, Val, and our two teenage daughters, Ava and Julia, in the beautiful Hudson Valley, suburbs of New York City, where today I will get inoculated from the COVID. I like calling it the COVID, with the sweet Moderna juice. That's right, I'm getting the Moderna vaccine today at 3 p.m. Eastern on April 1st. And my first guest today, Derek Thompson, taught me in his most recent article in The Atlantic that Moderna gets his name from RNA, Moderna. N-A, Moderna. And I learn all about that. We learn all about that when we talk with Derek Thompson today. Very excited to have him. He's the host of the podcast Crazy Genius, author of the book Hitmakers, and writer at The Atlantic. We talked about several of his most recent articles. Always a great guest. And today, probably my favorite conversation I've had with him. We covered a lot today, from housing market to the scientific research into the vaccine, how it was done, what the future holds, maybe cures for cancer, and more. And we also talked about crime in America. We covered a lot of ground today. Then Michelangelo Signorile will join me to talk about the latest horrific, arcane laws against both women's reproductive rights and LGBT folks, especially in the state of Arkansas, as well as other states that are copying those laws. Those are my two guests. They're coming up. I want to thank you for allowing me to have the day off. You guys were very encouraging. Yesterday, I took the day off. And part of today, I did do some work here in the shed and on the shed, because shed number 2 is almost done. Very excited about that. I made one half of it a little bit of a greenhouse, so I could put plants up, put that clear corrugated plastic on the roof. It looks great. Very excited about my workspace, my living space, and minimizing my life, decluttering things, and living sustainably and cleanly. I don't know what that means. But yeah, it was great to take a day off in the middle of the week spontaneously, and I've not taken an actual real vacation, or more than a couple days off in over a year, so I definitely am entitled. Taking time off has always been kind of hard for me because, well, I love my work, and I hate being absent, though. I didn't miss one day of high school and call in sick to SiriusXM more than a couple times over the 14 years that I worked there, but I was really worried if I took a day off, you might leave me for another shed-dwelling podcaster comedian. So thanks for joining me again, and I might even do it again. Maybe I'll do it next week. I don't know. I can do whatever I want, right? Because my daughters have the week off, and there's a lot going on. We're thinking about going to Hershey Park in Pennsylvania this week. But let me get to the show. That's what you want. That's what you're here for. It's time for the news and the last 24. Well, first of all, today is April 1st and April Fool's Day, so some people are playing all kinds of pranks that never really turn out very well. I mean, Michael Strahan apparently got rid of his famous gap between his two front teeth, or did he? April Fools! I don't know. Volkswagen is saying that they're going to rename at least their electric car line Volkswagen, which actually sounds like a great idea. Why would that have to be a joke? Anything to make them sound less German. Sorry, no offense to the Germans. But I'm not a big April Fool's Day. I'm not a big prank guy. I don't know. Never been that into that. I'm a comedian. I love making jokes, but I like doing that every day, not just one special day. Nonetheless, it is April 1st, and that means it is opening day. Major League Baseball is starting normally this year. Some stadiums will have more folks than others, depending on the states and the regulations. But yeah, get out your peanuts and your Cracker Jacks and your beer or whatever you do. It's opening day 2021. A loaded lineup, 15 ball games. All 30 Major League Baseball teams will take the field with over 10 hours of baseball, and that will be good for a lot of people's energy, a lot of people's moods, because, well, a lot of folks love baseball. Of course, also good for the local economies that support all those ball games in all those cities across America. April 1st, the 91st day of 2021. The 13th day of spring, 81 days till summer officially starts, and Memorial Day is 61 days away. That's the goal I've given myself, to have all of my landscaping, that I'm doing everything myself, the gardens, everything set and ready to go. Very excited about that project. Always great to have a project and a hobby. All right, now to the top stories of the last 24 hours, and that would have to be, of course, the third day of the Derek Chauvin trial out in Minneapolis, which hopefully I'll have time to get to and play a couple clips from. It was a heart-wrenching day of testimony from several new witnesses. Also, of course, I think the really big news was Joe Biden went to Pittsburgh to unveil his major new infrastructure project initiative announcement. It's called the American Jobs Plan, everybody. A sweeping $2 trillion plan to repair and improve the nation's infrastructure. White House is saying they're going to pay for it by raising taxes for corporations and the wealthy, who some didn't pay any, big corporations and wealthy folks. And guess what? That is very, very popular. Americans desperately want and need infrastructure, investments, repair, new technologies, and all of the jobs that go along with it. Here is President Biden's spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, quick clip on how they're going to pay for it.
The president's proposing a way to pay for his historic investments, reforming, making the corporate tax code more fair. He believes that the number of people, the number of companies that didn't pay taxes in the last couple of years is just insane. And most Americans would agree. We need to change that. We shouldn't incentivize companies sending jobs overseas. We can make changes in the tax code. And all of those things will help pay for historic infrastructure investment. So he believes it's responsible to propose a way to pay for it and to pay for his plan.
And what is in Joe Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan? I'll break it down for you. $621 billion for transportation infrastructure, $45 billion to eliminate lead pipes, $100 billion for broadband coverage, $100 billion to modernize the electric grid, $16 billion to plug gas and oil wells and restore abandoned mines, $213 billion for housing, $100 billion to schools, $400 billion to care services, $30 billion to prepare for future pandemics. And those are just the broad outlines. You drill down and gets a lot more specific. I want to learn a lot about this, where the jobs are, and how is this going to be done sustainably to fight or slow climate change in the future and build a better America for our kids and theirs. Now, here is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She went on Rachel Maddow's show on MSNBC last night and put the cost of infrastructure bill in context of the COVID relief package that President Biden just signed. Here she is.
First of all, this is $2.25 trillion over 8 years. For context, because these huge numbers are hard to understand, for context, we passed an almost $2 trillion COVID relief package that's supposed to last us 1 year, with some provisions lasting up to 2 years. So the $1,400 stimulus checks, that big package that we felt in our lives, were deployed on a shorter timeline. So I think that if we need to really have some shorter timelines, some urgency, greater urgency in this package. And I think that some of these investments need to be greater.
All right, now here is Secretary of Transportation, Mayor Pete, why am I calling him Mayor Pete? He's now Secretary Pete. He even changed his Twitter handle at Secretary Pete, who, by the way, was photographed with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the dog park, where I guess they both live near, but the future of the Democratic Party potentially at the dog park. Mayor Pete and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Anyway, here he is saying that the American Jobs Plan is going to open economic opportunity not only to those who work in the transportation sector, but to every American who counts on great infrastructure to get where they need to be.
Well, the main change is that Americans will be able to count on having the absolute best infrastructure. As the report mentioned, we are 13th in the world and headed in the wrong direction. Americans are being expected to settle for less. And you see that with the holes in our roads. You see that with the condition in our bridges, to say nothing of how things like our airports and our train systems are lagging so far behind what citizens in other developed countries can count on just as a matter of course. The other way Americans are going to feel the difference is in the jobs this is going to create. This is going to open economic opportunity not only to those who work in the transportation sector, but to every American who counts on great infrastructure to be able to get to where they need to be.
All right, there's Mayor P. And here's the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania. He is also a candidate for United States Senate 2022. A lot of folks who follow politics closely got familiar with John Fetterman after the election when Pennsylvania was being challenged. Big, menacing, white, bald guy. And he, because it was in Pennsylvania, he was on MSNBC with Stephanie Ruhle talking about why that's significant.
And the first place the president is going is Pittsburgh. That can't be a coincidence.
It's not. You know, if infrastructure is Elvis, Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania is Graceland. The president knows that, and we're so excited to welcome him here to our part of the state because Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania helped build this great infrastructure that made us the country that we are today, and it is absolutely no accident that he's returning today.
Western Pennsylvania has been struggling for a really long time. It's why so many people in your area actually turned in 2016 and voted for former President Trump. They wanted something different. They didn't get much, and now they've gotten President Biden. How are things going? I know we're only a couple of months in.
Fantastic, really. People tell me all the time, like, I don't know how much I realized I missed just basic competence and the fact that we are coordinating and we're not arguing about masks. And we're rolling out millions and millions of doses of new vaccine every day. And we're going to beat this virus. And we're not arguing or bickering. And I mean, this is something that should unite us. And infrastructure is one of those core things. I mean, nothing's more fundamentally American when it comes to the roads we drive on, the water that we drink, our electrical grid. We saw what happened in Texas. You know, we need these upgrades, and they benefit the reddest of the red counties and the bluest of the blue. This, to me, is a slam dunk, and the president should be credited for driving it home. The whole phrase infrastructure week has become like a running joke. Well, you know what? Joe Biden's delivering infrastructure week for America, and I think we're all going to get behind it because the majority of Pennsylvanians are absolutely well behind it.
And here is the president. Joe Biden went back to Pennsylvania, specifically Pittsburgh, announcing the multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan that'll roll out over 8 years, paid for by higher taxes on the wealthy. Here he is trying to convince us that he is going to get any Republican support for the most obvious things that they and their constituents want. Somehow, Republicans will convince them about debt and deficit or that their taxes are going to be raised. Nonetheless, here's Joe Biden trying.
The divisions of the moment shouldn't stop us from doing the right thing for the future. I'm going to bring Republicans into the Oval Office, listen to them, what they have to say, and be open to other ideas. We'll have a good faith negotiation with any Republican who wants to help get this done. But we have to get it done. I truly believe we're in a moment where history is going to look back on this time as a fundamental choice having been made between democracies and autocracies. You know, there's a lot of autocrats in the world who think the reason why they're going to win is democracies can't reach consensus any longer. Autocracies do. That's what competition between America and China and the rest of the world is all about. It's a basic question. Can democracies still deliver for their people? Can they get a majority? I believe we can. I believe we must. Delivering for the American people is what the American Rescue Plan was all about. And it's been overwhelmingly popular when I wrote it. Everybody said I had no bipartisan support. We're overwhelming bipartisan support with registered Republican voters. And ask around. If you live in a town with a Republican mayor, a Republican county executive, or a Republican governor, ask them how many would rather get rid of the plan. Ask them if it helped them at all. It's what the American Job Plan is about. The new one I'm proposing. I hope Republicans in Congress will join this effort. I hope and I believe a number of businesses will join this effort. And I hope and believe the American people will join this effort. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, we can do this. We have to do this. We will do this. We just have to remember, this is the United States of America. And I've said it 1,000 times. There's nothing beyond our capacity if we act together. So it's time to move together.
Okay, well, that's not going to happen. Here is the Senate Minority Leader, the devil himself, Mitch McConnell, explaining why it's not going to happen, because Republicans like to promise new things for people, but not pay for them. They just like to give money away to specific, super wealthy individuals and corporations. They don't want to spend money on you. It makes no sense, but somehow Mitch McConnell and his Republican supporters in the media and Congress are always able to convince us, enough Americans, that new stuff, that matches with the rest of the world. We're like number 14th or something. That's bad, and we can't afford it. Here he is saying, "Yeah, if you're asking for my advice, which nobody is, well, I don't. We just can't pay for it. We don't have the alternative."
My advice to the administration is, if you want to do an infrastructure bill, let's do an infrastructure bill. Let's don't turn it into a massive effort to raise taxes on businesses and individuals. Let me take you back just a year ago. In February of 2020, our country had the best economy it had had in 50 years. 50 years. As a result, largely of the tax reductions that we passed in 2017, which stimulated an enormous growth.
Of course, that's a complete and utter bullshit. The economy was roaring thanks to Obama, and Donald Trump rode it right into the ground and created massive new deficits by giving money away to his friends.
Of business. Unemployment was at an all-time low for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, all Americans. 50-year low. Now they want to, in the guise of infrastructure, completely undo that and raise the rates, which I think will have a significant dampening effect on the economy.
No, it won't. Never listen to, quote, fiscal conservatives on economics.
The short answer is I'd love to do an infrastructure bill. I'm not interested in raising taxes across the board on America. I think it will send our economy in the wrong direction. Hopefully, they don't choose that path, but they may.
Of course, they are not raising taxes across the board. The only individuals that would be having their taxes raised would be those making over $400,000. At least that's my understanding. Tell me if I'm wrong. But don't let that stop Mitch McConnell and his supporters in right-wing media and Congress from telling you that everybody's going to have their taxes raised. Just like the death tax. It affects like 2 people, and they make us all think that upon our death, our inheritance, our whatever we have left is going to be taxed before we can give it to our kids. What an injustice. That's not happening. Nobody had that happen to them. And if they did, it's because they were super wealthy. Get the wambulance for them. So that is the infrastructure chunk. I think that's the big story of the last 24 hours. Of course, the other big story and super important is the ongoing trial out in Minneapolis of former officer Derek Chauvin, who is on trial for many degrees murder of George Floyd. New witnesses were heard on Tuesday. Dramatic testimony was given. And of course, this case is capturing America because it's being televised all over because of the pandemic. They're not allowing people into the court, and because of the importance of the consequences of the outcome of this trial. I mean, simply put, this trial determines whether America, or at least this jury, but I think America thinks Black lives matter. That's the whole deal. All right, I thought this was interesting. This is a civil rights attorney, real smart guy. His name is David Henderson. I've been watching him on TV the last couple of days. He was on MSNBC, Deadline White House, and the anchor Nicole Wallace asked David Henderson how he thought the prosecution was performing so far.
I do think they're in danger of making some critical strategic mistakes that the defense can take advantage of. One thing you generally don't want to do in a courtroom is set up a David and Goliath motif. Unless you're David, it's dangerous to have so many lawyers working on this case, to be reaching the point where the judge feels like he has to admonish a witness at the end of the day, which he did yesterday, about giving more direct answers. If you worry about how a case can go sideways, this is how it starts happening. I don't think that the prosecution is necessarily doing a great job strategically. I just think that this evidence is so overwhelmingly good, they can't help but win the day each day with the testimony that we're seeing. But there is a path for victory here for Derek Chauvin. The one thing I'll say is I don't think he's capable of taking advantage of it, because what he has to do is take the stand and reverse this perception of callousness that the jury has received so far. So part of what we heard earlier about the way officers typically respond when someone dies under these circumstances, we have to see that type of reaction from him on the stand, which is normally what you see in an unintentional murder case.
You mean not someone for 9.5 minutes, hands in pocket, right?
No. He normally, when you have a case, and I spent a good part of my career as a prosecutor in special crimes, where you're typically dealing with people who committed a murder in the heat of passion, or they killed someone that they look back and wish that they hadn't.
Right.
But typically that person has to take the stand and convince the jury of that.
I also saw my great friend, Eddie Glaude. I mean, he's not my great friend. He's a great guy, and we're friendly, and he comes on the show with me, and I like him a lot. Very powerful guy. Always love watching and listening to him. Here's what he had to say to Nicole Wallace's question.
Jurors are human beings who heard that a trained medic was denied access to a man who we all know now was dying.
Yes, Nicole, imagine in your hypothetical that the persons who are attending to the person who's having an emergency say, no, we already called the medic. You don't need to attend to the person. We'll wait till they come. Right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It just defies common sense in so many ways. This has been hard to watch. Yeah. It's been hard to watch as a person who's not a lawyer, who doesn't understand the way the court works. But it's been hard to watch and listen, particularly this particular testimony, the testimony of the 9-year-old. And I understand the defense lawyers have to do their job. But what we're hearing over and over again are ordinary people who have skill sets in some ways, calling 911 because they see the cops doing something that they shouldn't be doing. We've heard 3 different versions of people calling 911. Here you have an EMT calling 911. Before that, you had Donald calling 911. You had the dispatcher calling the sergeant. All of this stuff is happening because people are seeing or noticing that something that wasn't right about what they saw.
And one more piece of commentary. My friend Dr. Jason Johnson, and he is a very good friend of mine now, he was asked by Brian Williams on the 11th hour on MSNBC if he agreed with the Eugene Robinson, columnist in the Washington Post, that this case, the Derek Chauvin case, is basically the entire criminal justice system of America on trial itself.
I agree and disagree, Brian, because the criminal justice system is always on trial. And even if Derek Chauvin ends up being convicted, it doesn't mean it's a good criminal justice system. It doesn't mean black people are treated fairly. We've seen so many different people, the killing of Tamir Rice, the killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman, Timothy Loman getting away with what he did. There have been so many instances of police officers and random white individuals shooting and killing black people and not facing any consequences, that in this particular instance, where the entire planet watched an execution, if that happens to put this man in jail, that doesn't mean the system is fine. It reminds me, to be honest, of Holdsclaw, the case that was in Oklahoma City a couple of years ago, where a man was accused, a police officer was accused of serially raping black women in the city. He was convicted because the crime was so egregious that the law couldn't allow him to get away with it because they would have no justification for anything else they did. That's what this is. This may be a bridge too far, but it doesn't mean that all the bridges that have been burned by this criminal justice system have been fixed with black America.
Woo-wee, always great. Well, I didn't get any audio from the trial itself. I wanted to, but I ran out of time. I hope you're watching it. I think it's very important to watch and to hear and to pay close attention to this trial and the details surrounding it. It's so consequential. I don't know how else to put it other than what we just heard from the clips I just played. All right, let me change gears now and talk about vaccines and COVID. I'm getting my vaccine today. Many of you have gotten yours or are about to. I really like this doctor who is on with Brian Williams as well. His name is Dr. Stephen Sample, and Brian Williams asked him about the vaccines, and maybe they should be talked about even better and more. And I mean, have we ever seen anything like the efficacy of these vaccines?
I think that public health officials in general and physicians, I think we've been hesitant to really come out and say with gusto how good this is. I am stoked about these vaccines. The research that came out today was amazing. Basically, nobody who gets these shots gets sick enough to go to the hospital, and certainly almost nobody dies. We don't have vaccines like that in general for a whole lot of things out there. I think we need to come out and really celebrate this vaccine in our public health agencies. And we need to tell everybody, these things kick ass. Go get one today.
You know what? I think I will. I think I will go get my vaccination today. And you know who can say this better than me? This guy on YouTube, the Holderness family, who made a hilarious for the first time in forever, Frozen parody called It's Vaccination Day. And he sees me, he's speaking my truth today.
It's Vaccination Day. It's Vaccination Day. It's Vaccination Day. Appointments are open. I'm group 4. I don't have to stay here anymore. I'm sick of eating takeout on these plates. The time indoors has got me stressed, but I just checked on CVS. Finally, they're giving me some dates. I'll see actual real-life people. It'll be totally strange. I might even get to go see a game. For the first time in forever, I'll hang out with someone else. Love you, but for the first time in forever, I won't watch sports by myself. Because you don't like sports, you know. I could go to a bar with buddies. You're the best. I don't have to live in fear. Love you for the first time in forever. I won't be right here.
All right, yeah, it's Vaccination Day. That's the Holderness family on YouTube. They have almost 1 million followers, 675,000 followers to be exact, and I thought that was funny. Thank you to Lydia West, listener Lydia West, who sent that to me because she knew I was so excited to get the Moderna juice today. Yeah! All right. That is the last 24, and now for everything else that is left on the floor, it's time for the news dump. Another jingle from listener Pete Coe, and I'll listen along with you for the first time.
Mountain lion in your hood, watch it run and jump. Your cat is in her jaws for today's news dump.
Oh, God. A cat is in the mountain lion's jaws. Oh, God, it's so good. They're so good. All right, it's not politics, it's not COVID, it's everything else. It's time for the news dump. Today's news dump is brought to you by Therese Fantasia, who says, by the way, the news dump is stellar. Thank you for taking the time to follow all the stories so closely that I don't have time to. I really do appreciate it. Here we go. Thanks, Therese. Let's start in Russia, where Russian opposition leader, Putin's strongest critic, who is now imprisoned by Putin, Alexei Navalny, said Wednesday he started a hunger strike to protest authorities' failure to provide proper treatment for his back and leg pain. In a statement posted on Instagram, how does he have access to Instagram? Navalny complained about prison officials' refusal to give him the right medicines and allow his doctor to visit him behind bars. Also protested the hourly check a guard makes on him at night, saying they amount to sleep deprivation torture. Vladimir Putin's most outspoken domestic critic. My age, Alexei Navalny. Thinking of you, buddy. How about this story from our southern border? A U.S. Customs and Border Protection canine dog sniffed out nearly $60,000 in drugs earlier this week at a border checkpoint in Arizona. The canine at a Yuma Sector immigration checkpoint discovered several packages of fentanyl pills hidden inside breakfast burritos stored in a black backpack, according to the Customs and Border Protection. I mean, why? What kind of an idiot hides their drugs in food, knowing that dogs are going to be part of the security protocols? I mean, just legalize it, okay? Burritos, that is, not fentanyl. But legalize all the drugs. Look at Portugal. They're doing pretty well. Now let's head down to North Carolina, where an accident along the I-95 in Cumberland County blocked all lanes of traffic, according to North Carolina Highway Patrol. And why is that? Because a truck carrying radioactive uranium compound crashed. That's right, nuclear fears. Radiation from the chemical is said to be present, minimal risk to transport workers, emergency response personnel, and the public during transportation accidents. But apparently 2 of the 4 1,000-gallon containers of uranium hexafluoride the truck was carrying fell off as it overturned. Apparently it's not being called a hazardous waste cleanup. Tractor trailer crashed, turned over on its side, and it was hauling uranium. But apparently there are no injuries right now. Hey, why are you late? Because somebody dropped uranium on the I-95. My bad. All right, so New York finally voted to legalize marijuana, and now the governor of Virginia, after ending capital punishment in his state, has decided to go out in blackface again. No, I'm just kidding. I kid the governor of Virginia who dressed up in blackface when he was in grad school. Anyway, no, the governor there, Ralph Northam, is apparently accelerating marijuana legalization. People 21 and over in Virginia could legally possess and grow small amounts of marijuana beginning in July under changes the governor is proposing to legislation in the General Assembly that they passed this year. How about that, Virginia? Virginia is for lovers of weed. How about this story? Google announced Wednesday that it was contributing more than $29 million to a newly formed group that has the goal of combating misinformation and fake news online. The multi-million-dollar commitment comes as tech giants, including Google, have taken heat for their perceived role in the proliferation of misinformation on the internet. I guess that's good? That's ABC News reporting. The S&P 500 capped a fourth consecutive quarterly gain. Nothing seems to be stopping the markets. And the CDC issued the top 10 causes of death in the United States for 2020. They are you ready for this morbid list? Number 10, kidney disease, 52,000. Number 9, influenza and pneumonia, 53,000. Number 8, diabetes, 101,000. Number 7, Alzheimer's killed 133,000 Americans. Chronic lower respiratory disease was number 6. Number 5 was stroke. Number 4, unintentional injury killed 192,000 people. Number 3 was COVID-19 with 345,323 deaths. Number 2, cancer, 598,932. And number 1 leading cause of death in the United States for the year 2020 is 690,882, and it's heart disease. So don't get any of those anytime soon. Stay with me and stand up for more news dump. And now it's time to get to my first guest of today's episode. I'm very excited to have him back on the show. I always love reading him at The Atlantic and reading him on Twitter at DK Tomp, Thomp. He is one of the most brilliant and well-spoken writers I know, period. He's the host of the podcast Crazy Genius, author of the book Hitmakers. I talked to him about his most recent pieces at The Atlantic. Ladies and gentlemen, my latest with Derek Thompson. There he is, Derek Thompson, and very happy to have you back on the show. Always love when I talk to you. We're using a StreamYard app, which is not Zoom, but the same problem exists that you were just responding to someone tweeting about. It's difficult to elegantly end a Zoom call. That's an issue, yes?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. I mean, I have never really known how to end not just Zoom calls and Skype calls, but also ordinary telephone calls. Like I do feel like it's just this long stream of, okay, well, it was great to talk to you. Yeah, great to talk to you. Yeah, well, we should do this more. Yeah, we totally should do it more. Okay, well, and there's just not this like there just needs to be some way for a little bit of like telekinesis to happen between the people's brains to be like, we both want this over in the next 5 seconds. Like, let's just say goodbye, talk later. So, and I just find for whatever reason, maybe just lack of familiarity, that it's especially hard with Zoom, that there's this, you don't really get a sense of people being able to wind down toward the end of the thought for some reason, not being like physically present with them. And as a result, I do this thing all the time where I'll say like, okay, and like draw out the A a little bit as if to indicate like my readiness to like stop.
That's not subtle.
But they're like in the middle of a thought. Yeah, no, it's not subtle.
But people still miss it.
I've offended lots of people.
I think people miss the things that even that aren't subtle a lot of times socially. I think I've gotten very sensitive to it because I interview people for a living, but I also think a lot of people you're talking to aren't necessarily like taped interviews. So there's work related calls for your articles and so on maybe. But the point I think I elegantly end. We'll see at the end of our conversation. But what has happened to me? What has happened to
yourself?
Yeah. What has happened to me is that and sometimes the guests, especially using this new app or any different app, don't know how to technically end the call. So we'll say goodbye, and then awkwardly we'll just stare at each other while we're trying to get off the screen. Has that happened to you?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's more akin to the physical world experience of like saying goodbye to someone and then taking a right around the building and they take the same right around the building. And you're like, so we still got a whole block worth of, so what are you going to do for lunch?
No,
how do you feel about that crack in the street? This is an awning over here.
I used to have that happen all the time when leaving SiriusXM Midtown building, saying goodbye and then realizing both of us are parked at the same garage or going to the same subway. So I guess we'll just keep talking since we're heading in the same direction on the same sidewalk.
Yeah, I think what hell is, at least Christian hell, I'm a secular Jew, but hell is thinking that you're saying goodbye to someone, and then you realize that you have to walk for 3 years with them in one direction, and then another conversation you think is going to end right after that, and you're stuck for another 3-year-long walk. I can't find anything more toe-curlingly like uncomfortable than the sense of like, I've given you everything I have conversationally, and now it's just the dregs. But we still got this fucking block. And so I have to make up some observations about sky. Are those cirrus clouds?
That actually is what Derek Thompson, I can imagine, would say in those situations, as opposed to a lower brow, small talky thing that I might go with. You actually reference some scientific natural occurrence that's happening. But boy, hearing you talk about these kind of social situations only makes me love you that much more, because you're such a nice guy and thoughtful.
Thank you.
I would hate to ever feel that I've been in that situation and never want to take up too much of your time. And so I want to get to what you have been writing about at The Atlantic and sometimes tweeting about on the Twitter, where I think you're excellent. Before we get to your specific articles, because you haven't written anything about this, but I'm sure you have insight. Fourth wave. Where are we at? What constitutes that? I'm hearing different things from the experts who you talk to and write about all the time. What is a fourth wave? And are we actually going to sustain one in America in different regions?
So it's interesting that you ask about the fourth wave, because Zeynep Tufekci just wrote an absolutely fantastic article for The Atlantic. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right, about the fourth wave. And I just spoke to her about a related matter for The Atlantic. And I think that what we're seeing right now is a couple things. This is a race between the variants and the vaccines. That sentence is becoming a bit of a cliche. Everybody's saying it.
I like it.
But everyone's saying it because it's true. It's a race between the variants and the vaccines. The alliteration in this case is not just convenient. It also has the glint of truth. So here's the truth. The vaccines work. They work spectacularly well. They worked in the trials. They work in the real world. Every country that has used them and inoculated more than 25-30% of their population, Israel, the US, the UK, has seen massively declining hospitalizations, massively declining deaths, massively declining cases. That said, these variants are the real deal. It's not that the variants are going to overcome the strength of the vaccines, but rather that among the non-vaccinated parts of society, these things are really contagious, and there's a possibility they could be more fatal than coronavirus OG. So we have to continue to accelerate the vaccinations, because that is the only way that you deal with the variants and get back to normalcy. And I'm a huge fan of doing both. I am sick of these lockdowns. I am sick of having to eat outside at a restaurant, even though that is what I am happy to do during an outbreak. I want to go into bars. I want to get back to normal. The way to do that is to vaccinate faster, faster, faster. We're doing it. Let's go faster still.
Very well explained. The other development just in yesterday, talking about how effective the vaccines are. Apparently, the Pfizer juice is now proven to vaccinate almost 100% protection for young people, 12 to 16. Have you heard about that?
I heard about it. I read about it in the New York Times. I was talking to Pfizer and BioNTech for a story that I think we're going to talk about in just a second. But I've not done official reporting on this. Let me just put it this way. This is not that surprising. It's not that surprising because you look at the clinical trial data for Pfizer, BioNTech's first vaccine for adults. It was spectacular. It was spectacular at blocking symptomatic illness, and it was beyond spectacular at blocking severe illness, death, hospitalizations. That was the clinical trial data. It's been shipped to Israel. Something like, more than 50% of the population Israel has taken it. They only had like 100, 200 cases, new cases of coronavirus yesterday. This is an amazing vaccine. So the fact that it works for late adolescents, teenagers is not surprising, considering that it's the same juice that we know works so well for adults.
It's not chewables. It's the exact same vaccine. My question, though, was, I suppose specifically, even though you hadn't done reporting on this, you could take a ballpark estimate about when that becomes available, because first you get the scientific research and then it goes through all kinds of stuff and then it gets rolled out. Do you have any idea about when that might be available for young people to take?
What I'm hearing, or at least inferring from Scott Gottlieb's public interviews, is that we want to vaccinate the, say, over 12 student population by this fall, which would mean we would start vaccinating.
Oh, wow. That's huge.
Early summer. And look, it's important, though, to keep this fact front of mind. This disease is an order of magnitude more dangerous for people in their 40s than it is for people who are teenagers. And it's several more orders of magnitude dangerous for people in their 80s, 90s than for people in their 40s. So while I'm a huge fan of accelerating vaccinations and beginning to make it eligible for just about everyone over the age of, say, 21 as soon as possible, we need to make sure that we are specially focusing on vaccinating older populations because they're so much more vulnerable. So that would be a reason why you wouldn't necessarily want to pull forward the vaccinations of like 12 and 13-year-olds, because this disease is simply not the same for someone about to have a bar mitzvah as for someone about to celebrate birthday number 80.
All really great points. I want to ask you about the pandemic mistake that America can't repeat. That's the title of a piece of yours that dropped in mid-March at theatlantic.com, which everybody should subscribe to. What is the mistake that America can't repeat?
So I wanted to write about, for the year anniversary of the pandemic, what was America's original sin in this pandemic? And I didn't know if people were going to talk about quarantines, or maybe they were going to talk about, having a president who actually believes in science. Everyone that I spoke to said it's about testing. We totally dropped the ball on testing. We have the infrastructure, however, to make testing a massive reality next time we have a pandemic. And the reason testing is so important, especially lots of early tests as the disease is beginning to spread, is to think about this. The reason why we had to shut down the world is because we couldn't see the virus. No one knew if Pete Dominick had it, if Derek Thompson had it, if their wife, child, uncle had it. We had to treat everyone as equally likely to be sick. And that militated the shutdown of the leisure hospitality public economy. But if we had the ability to massively test, then we would be able to see the virus as it was spreading, and we wouldn't have to lock down as much, because we could say, look, you can see the test, you can see where it's spreading, and you learn a lot about the disease as you test more. I think that if we had been testing a lot in March, we would have seen very quickly that this disease is an airborne virus and not a fomite or surface virus. That means it's spreading through the air through tiny aerosolized particles. That means we should definitely be wearing masks. And so you wouldn't have had Fauci, I think, saying in the middle of March, we're not really sure that ordinary people should be wearing masks. You would have said the opposite. This is an aerosolized virus. We can tell because of the testing. Everyone put your mask on. I think that would have saved lives. So for so many reasons, it's important to see an epidemic, especially at its exponential hockey stick moment.
It doesn't seem like that is the biggest hurdle, the developing and using of tests. It seems like the CDC just completely screwed it up because, my friend Dr. Aaron Carroll, you write about this in your piece, that certain institutions with resources, they made their own tests in-house. If they had the money and the expertise, like an institution with a medical school does, they can make their own tests and they can protect at least themselves. But the CDC is supposed to do that for America the way IU did it for their students and faculty. Am I right about this? And can we get it right?
Yeah, I hope we can get it right in the future. I hope the same way that, the human body forms immunological memory to a disease that it's already confronted, that the civic body of the United States can form institutional memory based on this pandemic. At the same time, there's no question that last spring was just a cavalcade of failures at every level. We didn't accept the WHO's offer to send some tests our way. The CDC said we can make the best test in the world. The test they made was contaminated and terrible. There were tests coming out of, for example, the University of Washington that seemed to really, really work, and the FDA dragged its feet in terms of greenlighting that test and allowing it to spread. So we messed up just a bit. And then, of course, the Trump White House, which, your listeners know how just absolutely pathetic that response was on a day-to-day.
You have a great paragraph about it. I was trying to find it to read it, but you said it would seem almost, how's the word pronounced? Gauche? I know what it means. Gauche?
Yeah.
To talk about the ineptitude of Trump, and it was so well articulated. Did I find it?
It's just the height of obviousness. Let's put it this way: the fact that Trump was an absolutely horrific leader during a pandemic, during a crisis, is beyond obvious. So I didn't want to spend too much time on it. And
you didn't. You spent it, but I'm glad that you did. It's important. I'm glad that you did. Trump was wrong about COVID-19 in almost every possible way that a person can be wrong about a thing. That's why I wanted to read it for those words that you wrote. And he burdened the entire public health system with mercurial demands and easy fixes and junk science. Yes, it was. That paragraph was important to the article, but well said. You don't want to spend too much time on it. So in the future, hopefully the CDC and Robert, you won't have a Robert Redfield. That guy doesn't seem like he's going to come out of this unscathed, his reputation.
No, absolutely not. People that I spoke to said that he is, right there under Trump in terms of the people that should shoulder the most blame. Trump did a terrible job consistently. Redfield, I think, was somewhat of an embarrassment. But unfortunately, it wasn't just limited to the CDC and the White House. There were failures across the board. And I'm not entirely sure why there was such systemic failure within the U.S.
Well, hopefully there will be an investigation into that. Do you think that's likely? Have you followed any of the talk about that? There should be an investigation into the January 6th. There should be an investigation into, obviously, COVID and the roots of what we're talking about. And I'm not sure there will be. It should be nonpartisan. It should be, not politicians. Do you think there's any likelihood of that?
I love the idea of having a committee that looks at best practices around the world. Not just an investigation into what the U.S. did right, but also, not just an investigation into what the U.S. did wrong, but an investigation into what Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia seem to have done right. You can add, Norway to that list. Denmark seems to have done a fantastic job at limiting spread. So I think there's a lot for us to learn. The world has never experienced something like this. I mean, this is like Armageddon deep impact stuff. A global catastrophe happened that every country felt in some way. Every country knew about it and was feeling this global pulse of catastrophe. Let's learn from that. I'm a huge fan of increasing global knowledge from this disaster.
Fascinating work as always from Derek, and you wrote a piece called How mRNA Technology Could Change the World. And in this piece, you reached out to the director of the Vaccine Research Center at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, my old job, John Mascola, and he told you that in the world of science, RNA technology could be the biggest story of the year. We didn't know if it worked, and now we do. You also reached out to Peter Hotez, who was suspicious. He's a friend of mine of the show. Talk to me about this very important article and, more important, research development that didn't happen overnight, right?
Yeah, so mRNA technology, synthetic mRNA, is the tech behind the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, which were the two first vaccines to be authorized by the U.S. government and the fastest vaccines to ever be authorized in the history of science. And so a lot of people, I think, are nervous about synthetic mRNA. It seems very new. They hadn't heard of it last year. So what the hell is this
It's
thing?
fake. It's not natural. Or is that what we mean by synthetic?
It's Bill Gates. He has this little tiny nanobots that he wants to put in our bodies. Like,
give me some of that Bill Gates juice. Give me that Bill Gates juice.
Yeah, give me the Gates juice. So what synthetic mRNA is it's mRNA, which is essentially the recipe for our cells to make proteins, but it is edited in a lab so that we are sending instructions to our cells to make any protein out of the sun. And so the protein in this pandemic that's so important to manufacture at scale within our bodies is the spike protein that surrounds the coronavirus. So if people have seen depictions of the coronavirus, they've probably seen it has little spikes coming off of it. In fact, corona means crown or crowned. Those crowns are spike proteins. The mRNA vaccines send instructions to our cells to manufacture these little spike proteins so that our immune system can recognize them, see them as enemies, enemy intruders, learn how to kill them, even though we're not getting sick at all from the virus, such that if we do encounter the virus at a later time, our bodies will recognize those spike proteins and attack them with the efficiency of a well-trained military. That is how vaccines work, right? They teach your body to recognize the disease before you're exposed to the full-fledged disease. mRNA technology does that in a beautiful, quick, nimble way. And this piece is about not only how it works for COVID, but also how it could work for the future of individualized cancer therapies and vaccinating against malaria.
Oh, God. It's so this article I was intimidated by, as I often sometimes am. But you break it down as well, by the way, in a conversation as you do Well, not as well, because there's more nuance in your article, obviously, but there's so much more to it. And it's a really important, I think, just for that final point you mentioned, the future of other diseases, other viruses, and specifically cancers. It's fascinating and it's very important. And I know I'm almost out of time. And I got to ask you, I love that how much you're interested in and seemingly obsessed with housing. It's such a fascinating, if it weren't, terrible for certain people, issue. And you've got I think it's your most recent piece. No, not your most recent piece. About this is actually back in early March. This is unprecedented. Why America's housing market has never been weirder. What an interesting, fascinating article that it would seem we still don't know some of the catalysts and some of what the outcomes will be. But it's important for a lot of reasons, one of which that there are a lot of Americans at home buying age in their 30s, which matters a lot. But what do you think is so weird about the housing market?
So I think there's two layers of weirdness. The first layer of weirdness is that we are emerging from a recession. And in recessions, what always happens is that the housing market craters. In fact, that's what happened in the last Great Recession, is that it was caused by the cratering of the housing market. Well, in this recession, even though in some ways it was even more serious than the Great Recession, housing did nothing but boom. Home prices went up in every single metro in the top 100 metros. That is simply bizarre and unprecedented. And the second layer is that in a lot of areas like San Jose, Washington, D.C., New York, home prices increased, but rents plummeted by 20%. So people who were short-term found a way to move out of expensive cities, but people who wanted to buy often bought in the downtown or inner suburbs of these metros. We've never seen anything like the rent-buy splits that we've seen in the last 12 months. Never, ever, ever. And I talked to the chief economist at Zillow, and he backed this up. So what this, I think, speaks to is the fact that there's something that sometimes people say about this recession recovery that we're in right now called a K-shaped recovery. And the K, that's sort of forking at the K within the letter itself, represents the diverging fortunes of the rich and the poor. Yeah. That for lower income people who tended to work as essential workers or working in the leisure and hospitality industry, in the restaurant business, they often suffered in terms of their physical health or in terms of their economic outcomes. But for high income people who could do their job from home, and here we are, two white collar workers essentially, or no collar workers essentially, talking to each other.
I consider myself a shed worker.
Shed worker.
But yeah, we don't have to go out. I'm the last person to be in line for the vaccine. I'm actually getting the Moderna juice tomorrow. Can't wait. But yeah, I see to your point. We're doing pretty well.
And just to connect this to the housing market, because these higher income people that are working remotely and not having their finances pinched by the recession have all this money left over because they're not going out to restaurants. They're not going on those vacations. They're doing everything in-house.
We're not paying for kids' classes. I think it's a huge underscore. Sorry to interrupt you, but like your kids' sports or dance in our case, it was a huge part of our monthly budget. And now it's not, much less vacation. So for a family like ours, it's probably pretty typical with teenage kids, that you're saving so much money on not spending stuff on the extracurriculars, if you will. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah. No. That's exactly the right point. I mean, the personal savings rate in this country just hit its highest level in 60 years. That's not just because of people in the bottom 20%. That's because a lot of people in the top 30%, top 10% just aren't spending a lot on the luxuries or the extracurriculars they used to. So where's that money going? Well, a lot of it is going into housing, into NFTs, into crazy stock plays. You're seeing the price of these assets being bid up. And I do think that the crazy NFT story and the crazy GameStop story and the weirdo housing market, the one underlying variable that is causing all this stuff to burble is the fact that highish income people are bored as hell and their personal savings rate has never been higher.
Get a hobby. Why America's great crime decline is over is the last article I want to ask you about. And I know I'm already over here, but you interviewed Patrick Sharkey, who's a really smart, sociologist? He's an expert on violent crime. And it would seem, if I were to try to encapsulate in a sentence, which is an injustice to you, that this has to do with certain areas of the country, certain neighborhoods and demographics, but overwhelmingly, and we could talk about black men and the violence in Chicago and places like that, but overwhelmingly it seems the one connecting thread, if there is poverty. Is that fair? Am I missing something?
I think that summarizing
you can't do
why
it.
crime rises and falls in one sentence is almost impossible.
Yeah.
So
and disrespectful.
I think you did just about it. No, not disrespectful. I think you did just about as good job as you can. This is a 5-paragraph answer to a very simple question. So I won't be able to touch on all of it. I encourage people to read this article and this interview with Patrick Sharkey. But let me summarize his position as essentially this. Last year was the most violent year of the 21st century. It saw the highest increase in violent crime of any year since at least the early 1990s and maybe since the 1960s. And more people were killed last year in gun-related shootings, that's redundant, in violent shootings and fatal shootings than in any year in American history. So something very serious is happening right now, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And it is more complicated than, well, the crime wave happened after the protests, we blame the protests. And it is more complicated than just localized poverty. And it is more complicated than just last year was weird with the pandemic and everything else. It's complicated as hell. And so I encourage people to read the article because I think I do as good a job as I possibly could to lay out all the variables that are a part of this recipe of rising crime.
I'm here for all your work, but I do love it when you print kind of your back and forth interviews with experts, as you did with Patrick Sharkey. It's a fascinating and super important article. This is all of your work, and I'm so grateful that you had time to talk with me about it. Brilliantly explained, as always, Derek Thompson. Thank you so much. Man, do I love talking to him and everybody I talk to, but what a privilege to be able to fire questions at him after reading all of his articles at The Atlantic. I love him. One of simply the smartest, most articulate, best communicators that I get to talk to. Go say hi to him on Twitter and thank him for joining us here on Stand Up at DK Tomp, THOMP. So great. Read him at The Atlantic. Listen to his podcast, Crazy Genius. Please, seriously, go tweet him. What are you waiting for, please? And if you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, look at the access that I have to these people. Just national, high-profile, brilliant, super good communicators in the podcast form. And I get them all on 2 a day, every day. I host it, I book it, I edit it, I promote it every single day. How do I do it? Well, I need your subscriptions. I need your paid subscription. This is my full-time job. So sign up at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Please. Thank you to all the new subscribers. I got to give shout-outs. I'll try to do that tomorrow. Whew, so much to do. But right now, it's time to get to my next guest, who is an old friend of mine from my days at SiriusXM, where he hosts the Michelangelo Signorile program on their liberal station, on their liberal talk station called Progress, every day 3 to 6 Eastern. He also has a great Substack newsletter called the Signorile Report that's celebrating its 1-year anniversary. Happy anniversary, Mike. We had a great conversation about several issues that Mike is an expert at talking about, from LGBT issues. We talked about the movement in Arkansas to outlaw abortion, as well as the future of the filibuster. Mike and I are always genuinely excited to talk to each other, and I think that comes through right here at the beginning when he genuinely says that. We always love speaking to each other. We always hung out at Sirius. We were always working together to help each other advance within the company. And he'll always be a great friend of mine and a hero of mine, because he really is a civil rights leader who has fought for gay marriage, gay equality, repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the fight is far from over, as demonstrated by our conversation today. He's on Twitter at @msignorile. That's Signorile. It's Italian, okay? Here we go. Hello, Michelangelo Signorile. How are you, sir?
Hi, Pete. Pete, it's so great to speak with you. I'm doing great.
We just talked for 15 minutes before I hit record, and it's great to hear your voice. It's great to connect with you, and I'm very happy to have you on my podcast because I really want to talk about the latest issue of your newsletter, which I love subscribing to, the Signorile Report. Mike is on Substack. How's that going? How often do you publish? Is it random?
I publish a few times a week. I write articles and put on some of the interviews from my show on SiriusXM, and I also put clips, and a lot of times like crazy, nutty, kooky caller discussions with Trump supporters who I just have to, bat down really hard.
That
People
is
do
so
enjoy.
Great that you do that, number one. Those are my favorite issues of your newsletter, which is bad. because today you have this thorough, well-written, researched column about an important issue. But I love when these nuts call your show and then you share them on Substack. It's the one thing I miss about Sirius is the live component and never knowing who you're about to talk to. And number two, the idea that you are now sharing those calls. I wish I would have thought of that and done that. But you probably those aren't necessarily the issues of your newsletter you want to get the most attention, but they probably do because people being crazy is entertaining.
Yeah, people enjoy them. It gives them, it's therapy too.
Yeah.
They feel good.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about Arkansas. You know, as I was reading your newsletter, I was reminded that, it was Arkansas that last week also passed very harsh restrictions on women's reproductive rights, abortion. And now it's on physicians and healthcare workers being able to turn away LGBTQ people. What is up with Arkansas, and why does Asa Hutchinson get treated like a moderate on the Sunday shows?
It's really radical. Yeah, it's radical what they're doing. And it's driven by both two things. The hardcore Christian nationalists who made such headway during the Trump administration and are emboldened. And then the Republican Party generally in the states and nationally, they have nothing. They have no policy. All they have is grievance and culture issues like Mr. Potato Head and whatever else. So these are the issues they're running on. And he also signed just the day before this bill on turning away LGBT people as a healthcare worker or as a doctor. He signed a law banning transgender girls from participating in team sports. So that came after the anti-abortion law. And, he said in an interview on CNN that he kind of admitted that the reasoning behind the anti-abortion law, even though it looked like something that would not pass muster through the courts, just like this might not with regard to doctors, he said he was basically testing the new Supreme Court. He wants it to get to the new Supreme Court. And I think that's what they're doing. They've got a whole new slate of judges that Donald Trump put on the bench that are totally unqualified and some of them really radical. And then they've got the Supreme Court. So they're bringing everything back that previously would have been thrown out of court and seeing if it's.
Mike, you broke up for 1 second there. You said that's okay. They're bringing everything that would have been thrown out, and they're trying it with these new judges. Let me understand. I mean, we can talk about this new court. So many of these courts, judges appointed by Trump, by the Federalist Association, Federal Society, at the lower courts, obviously the Supreme Court. But how do you see the court's makeup in terms of the religious right? Are we still calling them that, the Christian right? These people are, calling them religious or Christian, it doesn't do it justice because they are fascists, I think you say.
Right. And, the term now being used by a lot of people who study what's going on is Christian nationalists. They are kind of creating this nationalistic identity around religious beliefs. And the Supreme Court justices that Donald Trump put on the court, especially Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch, really have this very broad idea about religious liberty and religious freedom and exemptions that there should be. Whereas in the past, civil rights law had very few exemptions for religious liberty. Sure, a Catholic church didn't have to hire a rabbi. That's understood. But you cannot discriminate in a public establishment, in employment, in housing. And I think these justices are open to a broader interpretation of that. And that's why religious nationalists are bringing these issues back to the courts.
I feel like this latest decision by Arkansas, this bill that was signed that allows LGBTQ people to be turned away for non-emergency medical treatment, I've tried to set it up at the top, Mike, is so harsh and reprehensible, and that it may actually get a backlash. Maybe not necessarily in Arkansas, but you hear these kind of laws being passed, these kind of headlines. It's one thing to say and obviously this is wrong, but it's one thing to say, I'm not going to bake a cake for a gay couple for their wedding. It's another to say, I'm not going to give you health care. And I know there's some history in this when it comes to civil rights, but is it possible that this kind of movement, this kind of law is just too far and it'll get a real backlash? Healthcare, denying healthcare?
I think it will create a backlash, just like their attack on voting rights and, not being able to give water to people online who are waiting to vote will get a major backlash. But what they're hoping that the base of their party will be energized to the point where it can, overwhelm any backlash that happens. And they're hoping that this will really get that religious right organized for the polls for 2022. I mean, they're just thinking about this, at least the Republican Party is thinking about this legislatively. They're just as they're thinking about the immigration issue that way, as trying to get people out. I don't think, however, they're realizing that they're only further energizing people on the other side, and whether it's on voting rights, immigration, or on restricting LGBT rights to healthcare, I think it is going to get a lot of people out to vote.
You write in this latest issue of your newsletter, the fascistic contours of this Arkansas law regarding medical professionals and religious exemptions will be repeated by Republicans in other states. Another reason why we need federal protections for LGBTQ people. Give me a little bit of history in terms of civil rights. It started, in the 60s and was focused on race, and we can talk about gender. But then this new civil rights movement, which I've always considered you a hero and a leader in, having to do with LGBT rights, don't ask, don't tell, marriage equality, and issues like this. Why do we need federal protections? What do we have on the books? What has been passed by the House and stuck in the Senate?
Well, we don't have LGBT people included in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. 1964 Civil Rights Act makes it so that you can't discriminate it on the basis of race, on the basis of class, on the basis of gender, religion. But LGBTQ people are not included in that. In the states, little less than half the states have statewide laws protecting people, but more than half the states do not have those protections, just like more than half the states would never have passed protections protecting Black people. So you need a federal law, and it needs to be in that 1964 Civil Rights Act. And that's what the Equality Act would do. It would just add LGBTQ people into the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It passed the House of the second time, and now it is in the Senate. This time in the Senate, unlike under Mitch McConnell's Senate in 2019, it will get a vote in the Senate, but it's very hard to see, in fact, impossible to see that it would get passed with the filibuster in place, just as we've seen with other bills, because there just isn't going to be that 60 vote threshold. So the filibuster is also an impediment to getting these kind of protections under the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
The Equality Act, though, has passed the House. Democrats passed it in the House. Is that right?
Yes, it passed in the House, and it had a hearing in the Senate last week, and it'll go to a full vote in the Senate. It's just a question of how many votes it'll get. I don't think it will get many, if any, Republican votes.
What is the strategy that you see on the fascist, religious, Christian nationalist right? I can keep giving it other adjectives in terms of limiting rights or taking away rights. We looked at marriage equality and don't ask, don't tell. And it seems like we all settled, including those folks. There's no way to take these rights away. We really can't go back. We can try and around the edges. But now that we have the T, especially transgender, which is confusing for a lot of people, they don't understand it. We can use that issue, divide people, and get back at even the L and the G and the B. How close am I to describing the strategy? What is their strategy, and how are they using this transgender, which is newer for most people, and we're unfamiliar with so much of it, to divide and to get back to those old culture wars that you fought in and still are fighting in?
I think you're absolutely right, 100%. They always go for the one issue that people have the least amount of understanding about.
Bathrooms. like
right.
the
And
one issue, not only the least understanding, the least concern, not an issue. What bathroom people use. Nobody was raising an issue.
But because there's no understanding about it and very little understanding of transgender people, they can whip up fear. Fear is their greatest tool. So when gay people were more in the shadows, they used, gay sex. When then gay marriage, the idea was, oh my God, they're going to destroy marriage and what'll happen and children and this and that. They use fear. And the only thing that really helps to stop that or put an end to that is familiarity. The more people become familiar with issues, the more people become familiar with people who are different, the more they come to understand it. And so gay marriage has become more difficult for them because now it's happened, it's out there, people see people, they realize marriage isn't destroyed, that they're, going on fine. So they had to find a new scapegoat, and transgender people. And you mentioned the bathrooms. That then didn't work because that just turned out to be like all this noise and it went away. So now they're focusing in specifically on girls and sports. And once they get it back to children again, it's something people have fears about. So that's how they operate. Everything is about fear.
That's for sure, and it certainly does work. I mean, it's worked for a very long time, and now they're using all these transgender issues, which I always look at, and I really don't know that much about it, but my approach or my opinion is there really aren't that many people who identify as transgender. There really aren't. I mean, it's not like gay people where someone could be gay and you don't know. You'll know if someone is transgender, and we can go into why but the point being, it's not a huge movement of people, but they are using it to make it seem like we're all going to hell in a handbasket with all these transgender people taking over.
They make it seem like, it's growing or this or that. Transgender people are it's a very small minority of people who are being discriminated against. And there's so many myths about transgender people. I mean, if somebody really comes to the realization that their gender doesn't match with their body, that's a big decision. And for them to go through treatments and to decide they're going to transform their body to match the way they feel, that's a big decision. Nobody does that lightly. And, that's not something you just like, oh, I think I'll have fun doing this. And, it's something you have to become, you have to really make a decision about it. And then once people do, their body does change. So there is this myth that they are somehow going to be, for example, in sports, have a more of an advantage. But if that were true, we would see a transgender Olympian, a transgender, gold medalist. We haven't even seen transgender people. They've been allowed to qualify. They've qualified. They can compete in every international sports venue, every national sports venue. They've never won. Transgender women running running and competing against women have never actually won any of these big sporting competition. So you have to wonder then, do they really have an advantage? A lot of this is blown up. And again, based on people's fears rather than facts.
Yep. And raising the profile of specific transgender people like Joe Biden has in terms of appointing Dr. Rachel Levine, which I think is a really important issue we can talk about another time. But I just want to ask you one final question, which is your analysis. You talk a lot more about all politics, of course, and you cover it every day on your show on SiriusXM. And I'm just wondering how much you're talking about and what your thoughts are about the future of the Senate and where you think they need to go.
We talk a lot about it every day, and certainly focus in on different senators and how we need to push them on different issues regarding ending this filibuster. Because I think the only way we're going to see everything we're talking about, every bill, every important piece of legislation, everything that Republicans can use to really get an advantage that have to be stopped at is about ending the filibuster. We're not going to pass voting rights and stop them from what they're doing in Georgia, for example, unless we get rid of the filibuster. But I do really have a sense we're moving there, and I really get a sense that it won't be the same in the next few months as it is now. I think there will be a change in the filibuster. I think we will see a consensus. And I think Democrats are going to realize, including Joe Manchin, that it's the only way they're going to have a future.
What do you mean by that? How will doesn't Joe Manchin playing the role he's playing guarantee him a future in West Virginia?
Well, I think he's been one of the impediments among the Democrats with transforming the filibuster or abolishing it. But he's not going to be in the majority party too. If the Democrats lose the party, he's not going to have delivered for his own constituents if he doesn't do something about it. I mean, I think in the end, they're all going to realize that it's not going to be good for anyone unless they do something to avert this filibuster.
You know, Joe Manchin often cites Robert Byrd as his mentor, and Republicans often cite Robert Byrd as a racist to say that the Democratic Party was the party of racism because Robert Byrd was a former KKK member. They, of course, don't include the fact that he later in life did a mea culpa and did good things for black folks. You know, Senator Manchin has an opportunity right now, you wouldn't think, but on race, given where we're at, to do the right thing the way his mentor Robert Byrd did. And I'm kind of banking on that, maybe that he does the right thing, at least when it comes to voting rights, much less the filibuster as a whole. What do you think about that?
I think that Manchin, you have to at least look at the fact that he is in a very red state and has managed to keep winning elections as a Democrat. And if we didn't have him there, we would not have control of the Senate. So, you have to allow him to do what he needs to do. But at the same time, I think you need to, pressure him and make sure he understands what his legacy will be. And to your point, I think he does want to see his legacy as having done the right thing.
Michelangelo Signorile, listen to him every day on SiriusXM, subscribe to his Substack and other things. Everything's in the show links. I am so happy I got to talk to you today. Thank you for joining me. And on short notice, I got your newsletter. I was like, I got to talk to him about this. I'm so glad that you were available.
Well, thank you. I love talking to you too, Pete. And great to speak with you again today.
There he goes, Michelangelo Signorile at M Signorile, and subscribe to his Substack. Go do it right now. It is the Signorile Report. Tell him you heard him here on the Stand Up with Pete Dominick Daily podcast. And go give the show 5-star review as well. Thank you very much to Dan Leaf, who did that this week, and let me know about it. And hopefully others did as well. But that's a big, big deal to grow and promote the show, of which I have many ideas. So let me know yours. And I hope to see you tomorrow night at the Stand Up Subscriber Hangout, virtual hangout. That's 8 p.m. East every Thursday night. I'm off to get my vaccination. Yeah. Then my parents are coming down for a visit for a couple of nights, and very excited about the next few days. And I can't do it all without your support. So thank you very much for supporting me and my family over the past year with a paid subscription. If you haven't signed up now, please go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick and sign up for as little as $5 a month. Or you can also just go to the paid subscription link in the show notes of today's podcast if you can't remember the link. All right, that's it for me today. Listener, songwriter, and super talented, amazing, brilliant guy, John Carroll, wrote this song. Take us away, Johnny.
Let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, to make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
Well, hello there, show enders. I have not done very well with my diet this week. I only had salad on Tuesday, but not on Monday or on Wednesday. It ended up, I guess I'm learning though about how I eat or when I eat, and I end up splitting things with my daughters too much, ordering or making food for them. So that's a problem. But maybe I'll have a salad tomorrow. I'm trying to do a salad lunch every day, and I got some good tips from listeners on that idea, but I can always use more. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And here now from my SiriusXM days, a funny little segment I did with Bill Nye, the science guy, called Bill Nye, Look Me in the Eye, with Pete Dominic.
Bill Nye, look me in the eye and tell me, if all space and time began at a single point, why do we see light from the past if we all started from the same place?
Well, that's the elegant, wonderful thing about astrophysics. You can see light from 13.6 billion years ago. That's what's so cool.
Look me in the eye and tell me whether or not you advocate for every American to get a flu shot.
It is not an option. You guys, vaccines is 250-year-old technology. This has been tested. This works. This is science.
How about that?
Get vaccinated, people.
Bill Nye, will we ever be able to travel at the speed of light?
With the discovery, or rather detection, of gravitational waves, it seems even more unlikely that you'll be able to travel at the speed of light.
Bill Nye, look me in the eye and tell me what the scariest scientific catastrophic event could be in your mind.
Oh, a meteor, an asteroid that hit the Earth. Be bad. It happened to the ancient dinosaurs. There is no evidence that the ancient dinosaurs had a space program. If they did, it was not effective enough against an incoming. But we could. If we were thoughtful, we could set up a spaceship to go out and give it a nudge.
Are we still evolving, and are those of us who are bald more evolved?
My understanding is bald people are in the mix, and I don't know that you're more evolved. I don't. Yeah, humans are still evolving, that's for sure.
Bill Nye, the Science Guy, look me in the eye and tell me what gives you the most hope for the future.
That young people are excited about science. So in the future, we will have enough scientists and engineers to save the world.
Bill Nye, the Science Guy. Awesome.
Looking you in the eye.
Looking me in the eye. This has been another episode of Bill Nye, Look Me in the Eye, which we hope is a thing.
It's a thing. It's a great thing.
It becomes a big thing.
Oh, that was fun. I had a good time doing that. Thank you very much. I look forward to talking tomorrow. Love you. Bye.